Hi, my name is Stephanie Flint, and I am a co-creator of Infinitas Publishing, and today I'm going to be doing a reading of Chapter 5 from Magic Stealing. Magic Stealing is the young adult fantasy book that I recently wrote and released. It is now available in paperback on Amazon, so if you're interested in the paperback edition, it's now available. This weekend, my husband and I spent time working on the proof edition of Battledecks Trials of Blood and Steel, which is a tabletop card game, and we got that on order, so in a few weeks we should get that in the mail, and then we'll be able to actually go through, and hopefully it will only need a few tweaks here and there before we're actually able to release that. But that's the main news that I have for today, so in the meantime, I hope you enjoy the reading. Chapter 5. He's dead. Tirana stumbled to her feet. She stared at the seer. He didn't look dead. But he wasn't moving. He lay slumped on the floorboards, his tunic sprawled around him. He'd been living a moment ago. To be dead now? Impossible. This was an illusion. It had to be. Then again... She bit the inside of her cheek. Once, long ago, when Cyclona showed Tirana how to use her crystal, she'd convinced a couple of the servants to come stand in front of them. One had magic, the other did not. She'd pointed to the one with magic and all the ribbons, and explained what ribbon magic was and how it worked. Then Cyclona pointed to the other servant, and said that even though he wasn't a mage, he still had magic. Everyone had magic, but it was difficult to see because it was closely related to string magic. Two thin, near colorless purple strings ran through his body, each entwined and almost impossible to spot. Cyclona had adjusted the crystal to make them more visible. "That's the only string magic visible to a ribbon mage," she'd said. "One strand is life, and the other is death. Everyone has them. If you don't, then you're dead. That's how the gods made us. But only the really powerful gods can manipulate those strings, so there's nothing to be scared of." Nothing to be scared of? Cyclona couldn't have been more wrong. That memory had stuck with Tirana ever since. She balled her hands into fists, trying to stop herself from shaking. The seer had neither of those strings, though she wasn't so sure she could see them without a crystal. "How can anyone rely on magic so much that it kills them?" she asked. Darren withdrew a bolt of cloth from the shelves and reverently draped it over the dead man. "Magic's a large part of us. The more we use it, the more important it becomes. It ties itself to us, and to pull it away, I guess the body goes into shock, forgets how to function." He slowly backed to where Tirana stood. "We should see if the priests were affected. If they lost their ribbons, they might be dead too. If not, maybe we can help." Tirana glanced at the fallen seer and shook her head. "I can't. Tirana, we still have magic, so we should try." He motioned to the door. She followed him, but cast one more glance at the cloth-covered corpse. She let out a breath, then forced herself to leave the cottage. Outside, the crowd had thinned. Merchants and commoners alike sat or lay on the sidewalk. Some rested their heads on their knees, others were curled into little balls. Crowds gathered around the unfortunate mages as those who didn't have magic tried to figure out what happened. "Look, there's Alea!" Darren rushed across the street to the unconscious apprentice. She hadn't made it far before the stealing occurred. He touched her hand. A golden streak raced from his palm into her arm and through her body. Tirana waited at a distance. Darren's magic brightened within the apprentice, and she took a sharp breath. "What happened?" She craned her neck toward him. "Everything's dim." "Your magic was stolen." She gave him a puzzled look as he helped her sit. "Stolen?" He nodded. "Is there anything we can do to help?" She rested her head against her knees and groaned. "I feel terrible." "You're lucky to be alive," Darren said softly. "Can you walk now?" "Maybe." He helped her stand, and then lean against the nearest stone building. After a moment, she crept along the brick walls with the pace of a snail. A few passers-by glanced in her direction and hurried away. One of them was Cyclona's old friend, back before she left for the academy. Tirana froze. "Darren, I need to get back to the manor. I don't think my parents have enough magic that the loss would kill them, but Cyclona—" She couldn't bring herself to say the rest. Darren paled. "They're not at the estate, remember? You said they were coming here." Tirana searched his eyes, a lump stuck in her throat. "We have to look for them." He took her hands. "If you can go to the healers and ask about the priest, I'll change into a bloodhound. I can find their scent faster than you." The unspoken words, that if she used her magic she could find them, hung between them. She nodded. "I'll do that. Take care." Diernan changed into a brown hound. His floppy ears were tipped in white, while a round patch remained over his left eye. He sniffed the air and the ground, then raced toward the square. "That boy still has magic?" an elderly woman asked, incredulous. Her curly hair clung to her cheeks, and a shawl was wrapped loose over her head and shoulders. Joanna nodded. "We both do." "Shawl bless you." "Bless them!" Another woman strode forward, her dainty skirts swishing around her elaborate heels. Her face was nearly as red as the brick of the shops in Ashan, and her forehead twisted into an ugly V as she thrust a finger at Tarana. "They stole our magic!" Tarana crossed her arms. The lady was obviously from out of town. "I am Lady Tarana of Corvanalano, daughter of the Lord of the Armory. Believe me, I wouldn't steal your magic." "Why would I believe you? One moment my husband had magic, and the next he is sick." She gestured to a man in a flouncy tunic sitting on the edge of the street. "Then you and that boy come along, and he changes before our eyes. If you didn't steal our ribbons, who did?" "Some mage named Coffrash, according to the seer," Tarana muttered. This lady was going to be a headache, and Tarana's new-found magical sight was a terrible distraction. Her lime green ribbons darted furtively to the noblewoman, as if suggesting they could enact a teeny bit of vengeance for her troubles. "Where is the seer? I demand to speak with him." The lady whipped a handkerchief from her purse and dabbed her forehead. "Go on, don't keep me waiting." Tarana rubbed her ear from the woman's shrill voice. "The seer is dead. Oh, if you'll excuse me—" "Dead?" The woman's eyes widened in shock. "You've murdered the only man who could testify against you." A crowd began to form, curious onlookers seeking answers, and the gossips who would enjoy such a pretentious lady. Tarana didn't have time for this. And those trickster cursed ribbons were a nuisance. How did Diernan deal with seeing magic constantly? "Diernan is a pleasant young man," chided the elderly woman. "I've known him since he was a boy. Blessed by Sheol if any of us are. He'll help us." Joanna glanced toward the healer's temple. Shaul had been the head of the gods ever since Liston Nissatar had returned to the immortal realm, and he was more likely dealing with the second tier and minor gods, not bothering with the daily life of mortals. "How do you know he's blessed?" the lady demanded, interrupting Joanna's thoughts. She raised her thin eyebrows high. "Perhaps he was gifted by the trickster. He's a shapeshifter, is he not? The worst gift a mage could have." Joanna cleared her throat. "Didn't you say your husband was a mage?" "Shapeshifting isn't that uncommon." The lady raised a hand to her chest, flabbergasted. "You couldn't possibly insinuate that my honourable husband, Lord Jekorlik, is anything less than the kindest, noblest, most well-intentioned mage I have ever... I don't like magic, but I don't go around calling anyone who's a shapeshifter an agent of the trickster." Joanna scowled. "I suppose if you want to duel over his honour..." The lady's eyes widened more than Joanna thought possible. One of the locals behind her snickered, and the lady whipped around on him faster than she had whipped out her handkerchief. "You insulting buffoon! I'll teach you manners!" "Go," the elderly woman whispered, hurrying Joanna away from the rising argument. "We'll keep Lady Jekorlik distracted. You help the healers." "Thank you," Joanna said. The woman patted her arm and gave her a little push, and Joanna ran down the street, ignoring the green ribbons racing alongside her. 12 minutes later, Joanna reached the place of the healers. They were primarily acolytes training to be priests or priestesses, but many of them simply enjoyed helping others when they could, even without a patron god in mind. In the time since the stealing, a crowd had amassed at the steps of the domed building. Joanna pushed through them, not wanting to call attention to herself, then gave up when the grass grew so thick she couldn't elbow her way through. She turned and raised her arms. Hey, quiet!" The clamor quieted and all eyes turned to her. She swallowed hard. She liked attention, but only when she had a wooden washter in hand and an opponent on the other side of the field. She cleared her throat. "Please, we know her magic has vanished, but unless you have the ability to help those who are sick, you need to go home. Wait until we know the nature of this theft, so we can ensure everyone is safe." A few people exchanged glances and agreed to leave, but more strayed to the doorstep. Joanna sighed. At least she tried. She turned to go inside and stopped short. A young child in simple yellow robes looked up at her. Tears streaked her cheeks, and she held a bundle of flowers. "Why did Ifa leave us?" Joanna blinked. "What are you talking about?" A slightly older boy came up behind her. He peered hesitantly around the door. "No one is supposed to come inside." "I can help." The boy shook his head. "Without magic, no one can help." Joanna grimaced, then lowered her voice. "I still have magic." His green eyes widened, and he closed the door to a mere sliver. "You have magic?" "Yes. Now please let me in." He exchanged glances with the little girl, then shook his head. His golden curls bounced against his ears. "I don't think we should." Joanna gritted her teeth. People were dying, and she couldn't even get inside. She slammed her body against the door, catching him off guard, and shouldered past him. He nearly fell on his bum before he righted himself. "Wait!" She strode through the hall, trying to guess which room was the infirmary. "The priests are dead!" he blurted. She stopped. "All of them?" He gave a tiny nod. The giant hall engulfed him with its larger-than-life painting of the Chiron Pantheon. "Has Medea gone mad?" Joanna shivered. That'd be a terrible day. Medea was the goddess of the dead, responsible for guiding their spirits into the immortal realm, or wherever they went after they died. She was among the first of the gods, and thus more powerful than most. Joanna glanced over her shoulder. "All the priests are dead." The little girl clung to the boy's yellow robes and nodded, but the boy bit his lip. "A couple priests and a few of the acolytes are still alive. But they're dying, and they're in the inner sanctuary. Outsiders aren't supposed to go in there." Joanna snorted. "They're dying. I have magic. I might be able to help them." He bit his lip. "Well..." She grunted and hurried on. If he wouldn't help her, he could deal with the dead on his own. She'd save those she could. That was the whole point of being a guardsman, wasn't it? Protect the helpless and have adventures in the process. If she couldn't have her adventure, she might as well do what she could to help. She entered the first door in the domed temple where priestesses often disappeared with their common offerings. Hushed voices and soft moans led her to the infirmary. She thrust the door open, and a young lady stood abruptly. "Lady Cavanlano! You aren't supposed to be here. If you poison the sanctuary—" "Shut it!" Joanna grabbed the chair beside the bed and plopped into the seat. An elderly man lay under yellow linens. His long gray hair sprawled across the thin pillow, and his wrinkled skin shone with sweat. Joanna laid her hand on the man's shoulder. If Durnan could do this, so could she. She just couldn't think about the magic involved, or the numerous beds filled with the dead. She gritted her teeth. She'd never been able to see magic on her own before, but so long as she could, it could make itself useful. She urged the iridescent gold ribbons to heal the priest's injuries, much like she could technically use them to heal a bruise or a cut. She had plenty of scars to show where she hadn't used the confounded things. But now the ribbons flitted around her hands and flowed all too willingly into the old man's body. His breathing eased. He let out a soft sigh, shifted under the covers, and finally relaxed. Joanna held her breath, waiting to see if he went into relapse. He slept. The acolyte stared at her from across the bed. "How—" "Just show me the next person," Joanna demanded. The non-magical acolyte nodded and led her to the next bed. She instructed the boy to bring her chair with him. 10 patients later, Joanna's magic glared in her vision. She had a dull headache, and her whole body felt like one of Xiklana's failed attempts to cook noodles for Maiev. She was almost done. One more patient, and she'd have temporarily eased the pain of those who were still alive in the temple. "Lady Cavanlano?" Joanna looked up, wiping sweat from her forehead, then gave a pitiful whimper. The child had let in a dozen new patients from the front steps. Joanna took a deep breath, then set about stabilizing as many of them as she could.